Sometimes what makes a person weird is also what makes them powerful. Welcome back. This is Top 10 Nerd and I'm your host Amanda McKnight, celebrating the ability to harness the power of weird. Today we'll be counting down the top 10 most powerful superheroes with weird powers. I love talking about awesome weirdos. They are so often my favorite in comics. Number 10. Exceptional. Bailey Hoskins is known for being the worst X-Men ever, probably because his powers are pretty lackluster sounding, but managed to pack a pretty big bang when they do get used. Bailey's powers involve self-detonation, but the only thing is that activating his powers will actually also result in his death, meaning he can only use them once and doing so will kill him. However, he does end up doing this, and in doing so saves the world, or at least a world. His good friend and teammate Miranda has reality warping powers that are extremely powerful, propelling her into her own classification of mutant even, in terms of power level. But even then, this time around, it seems Miranda can't seem to interfere in this world at this time. It seems she needs some help from Bailey, and in sacrificing himself, he not only saves the world, but also seemingly helps Miranda to fix it and set it right again. Or potentially erase it. That's kind of what it looks like happens at the end. But maybe that's how you fix it. Just wipe it. Number 9. Funny Man. Funny Man is an odd superhero who is historically actually pretty significant, despite how weird he may seem. He's not just powerful for how much of a goofball he is powerful in a historical context, which I think means he deserves this spot. Also, I'm not sure if we've ever mentioned him on the channel. As far as I can recall, I haven't at the very least. Funny Man was a creation of Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, after they both left DC and began what would become an epic and long-time legal dispute over the rights to Superman, not feeling they were being fairly paid their dues. And for those who don't know, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster are the ones that created Superman. Siegel especially was passionate about getting the rights to their character back. After leaving DC, they reconnected with former DC editor Vin Sullivan, who had started up his own comic book company, Magazine Enterprises. Jerry and Joe tried to create the magic of Superman again, but this time by teaming up to make something entirely different and new: Funny Man. Celebrating their love of comic book pranks and humor, Funny Man was comedian Larry Davis, who after a publicity stunt gone wrong, ends up actually catching a real-life criminal, and decides to become a bona fide superhero, using his jokes and funny pranks to apprehend and stop criminals. A wacky idea that sadly did not end up panning out in the end for Jerry and Joe, as the character only lasted 6 issues. Funny Man didn't have any powers, but he was miraculously and comically good at stopping villains with his antics, and sometimes even doing this completely by accident. And friends, before we move on to the next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to show your love for our channel on perhaps another platform, you can head on over to Facebook, click that like, it really does help us out here at the channel, and thanks if you've already done it. Number 8. Dead Girl. I think one of the weirdest things about Dead Girl is that her whole thing is immortality, as she's already dead and basically can't die, with her mutant powers activating only after her death. And yet she did die in the comics, possibly due to a disease which ultimately caused her to fall apart from decomposition. That is the one thing she's meant to be good at, not dying, and yet it happened. Because she's technically already dead. Fortunately, that didn't stop Dead Girl from going on adventures, and she currently still is doing so, even despite dying. Joining the newly reformed Static X as they battle against Zeitgeist Team Excellent. Dead Girl's power allows her to reanimate herself, parts of herself, and to communicate with ghosts and even temporarily resurrect the dead. Number 7. Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur make for a great pair, especially as Moon Girl's power set allows her to swap her consciousness with Devil Dinosaur's consciousness. An oddly specific but super powerful ability. Moon Girl, aka Lunella Lafayette, actually has inhuman lineage and gained her abilities after undergoing Terrigenesis. Aside from that, she is also a super genius, and despite her young age, is likely one of the most brilliant and gifted minds that we have in the Marvel Universe. Also, when we're talking about weird power sets and weird heroes who are also super powerful, Moon Girl really fits the bill, as even outside of being a superhero, she's identified as a kind of oddball her entire life. In fact, she was super nervous about undergoing Terrigenesis because of this. Although she has embraced her weirdness, she was worried that this would just be another thing that would make her stand out more and turn her into even more of a freak than she already was. Aw, Lunella. I identify a lot with Moon Girl. I feel like she's such a cool and underrated character. Number 6, Elasti Woman. Elasti Woman. I love Rita Farr. She is one of the members of DC's Doom Patrol. In the show Doom Patrol, Rita might struggle to utilize and control her powers, still afraid of them and of her appearance while using them, as well as becoming, permanently stuck in her kind of creepy elastic form that she has in the show. But in the comics, Elasti Woman has learned to master her abilities. Rita gained her powers while she, as a Hollywood actress, was working on a set in Africa. She was exposed to volcanic gas, which allowed her to change the size of her body and limbs at will, also having the ability to stretch her limbs. John Byrne's interpretation of the character was also able to alter the size of objects just by touching them. And the current Prime Earth continuity version of her also has shapeshifting abilities. I also feel like DC's Doom Patrol series does a great job of capturing what shapeshifting or stretching powers would be like in real life, and kind of the whole horror and body dysmorphia aspects of them. Possibly it's one of the best live action interpretations of this kind of power set I have ever seen. Also, if you aren't watching DC's Doom Patrol, what are you doing with your life? Go watch it. It's so good. Number 5, Multiple Man. Multiple Man has a strange and yet awesome power. He can create duplicates, often referred to as dupes for short, of himself, and use them to do and learn all sorts of things. Why learn? Well, because when he absorbs these duplicates back into himself, he also gains all their memories and knowledge, as long as he gets to absorb them back, that is. We've seen a lot of weird stories with Multiple Man because of this part of his unique power set, including one where he had a baby with his girlfriend Siren, but because he had actually sent a dupe to sleep with her on the night the child was conceived, when he first went to hold their newborn child, because it was actually a product of a dupe, it got absorbed back into him. Lots of weird things about that. Well, that whole scenario. And then there was the time that he secretly sent a dupe posing as him, I mean technically they're all him, but they're not the real him, to hang out with Layla and their son together, Davy, when Davy took his first steps. This dupe tragically died during an attack on Madrox's lab in X-Corp, so he wasn't able to actually absorb him back, and therefore lost those memories forever. Ooh, sad, weird. Kinda awful, Jamie. I love when people are always like, man, Jamie, why are you always sending dupes to hang out with me? And Jamie's response is just like, I mean, technically the dupes are me, so you're just hanging out with me. Number 4, Crazy Jane. Crazy Jane is a member of the Doom Patrol, and honestly, that is a great team to look at if you want to find some superheroes who are actually quite powerful, but also just wonderfully weird. Jane is no exception to that rule. She's kind of like Marvel's Legion, who appeared only a few years before she made her debut over at DC Comics, first appearing in Doom Patrol issue 19 of the 1987 series, created by comic book writing legend Grant Morrison and masterful artist Richard Case. Crazy Jane is Kay Chalice, who within her has at least 64 personalities, each with their own personas and their own power sets. While this means she has a lot of power at her fingertips, the challenging thing is that Jane often struggles to find balance with the various personalities residing within her, and has demonstrated various levels of control over them, and they over her. Number 3, Squirrel Girl. Squirrel Girl is also one of the most ridiculous heroes when it comes to her premise and her power set. Although really what makes Squirrel Girl, aka Doreen Green, so strong of a hero, so powerful of a hero, and of a character, is her likability and her approach to heroism. She has a tendency to beat villains by befriending them and persuading them to stop their devilish and deadly plots. Although she has also summoned an army of squirrels in the past to help her take down even some of the most famous and notorious villains, like early on in her career when she handily and embarrassingly defeated Dr. Doom. Squirrel Girl has also faced off and defeated the likes of Thanos and Galactus as well. I love Doreen Green. I want to be Doreen Green. She's so great. Number 2, Metamorpho. Probably one of the strangest but also most powerful heroes out there is Metamorpho. Metamorpho made his first appearance back in 1965 in The Brave and the Bold issue 57, and has also been known as the Element Man in comics. He has a very unique and interesting power set that allows him to transform his body or parts of his body into any element. This also gives him a pretty unique look as well. Metamorpho isn't the only hero to exhibit these powers though. At one point we also had Element Girl, whose story ended up turning quite bleak in the end, I must say. She assisted Metamorpho on some of his adventures, and maybe if we do a part 2 I will tell you some more about her on that list. Number 1, Dupe. By far the strangest yet kinda in a weird way most OP characters of all time from Marvel, Has to be Dupe. Okay, so he's at the very least the most strange, even if you don't agree that he's the most OP. And now we have his evil counterpart, Pood in Excellent. Oh boy. Dupe is pretty powerful because he has some fourth wall shattering level of awareness and is able to actually move between panels in comics, existing not just within the pages panels, but also moving into the borders and margins of that page as well, which I think is pretty wild. He's also demonstrated some powerful magical abilities as well as super strength, speed, durability, and even the power to resurrect, without the help of the Five no less. Yeah, because Dupe is also like associated with mutants, even though I don't really know if we've clarified if Dupe is actually a mutant, but he's definitely mutant adjacent at least. I mean, if you know Axel Clooney, I think you know why I included him here on this list. Zeitgeist is most often associated with ecstatics. His power is that he can vomit up acid. Ew. He learned he was a mutant with powers in one of the worst possible ways during a makeout session as a teenager. Yeah. The girl he was with at the time survived, but he's never been able to remember her name, and as such, her presence haunts him. He's always wondered if remembering her name would help him to be less tormented by this moment from his past. Zeitgeist is not only weird, but I don't think he has the right attitude for the X-Men either. Sorry, Zeitgeist. Next up, Maggie is another mutant who is just straight up weird looking. In fact, when Alex Ross helped to create her along with Kurt Busiek, he helped to make her look even more strange than she was initially intended to be. Maggie was originally going to be a boy, a little green boy specifically, but Ross wanted her look to contrast even more with Angel, who appears on the cover of this issue with her, flying with his angel wings out while he carries Maggie in his arm. Maggie makes her first appearance in Marvel's issue number 2. She was born with her mutation and because of this was abandoned. She has such a sad story in comics, and while I don't think we'd ever see her on the X-Men, also because, you know, she's a little kid and they don't normally have little kids on the team. Teens maybe, but usually not like infants. I would love to see her appear more alongside them, just because she has such a unique look and sad origin, and I'd love to see her grow up and like find happiness. Like, she doesn't have to be on the X-Men team, but I don't know, just be cool to see her like being mentored by the X-Men. This next one, Calisto, is too much of a rebel for the X-Men, but she also, for a while there, had tentacle arms, which is why I've included her here. She doesn't have them anymore, to be fair, but I thought that might be an interesting sight to see her recruited in the past, back when she did have her tentacle arms. Her tentacles, however, were not part of her mutation, but instead were given to her by the other mutant warlock, Mask, who can use his powers to change a person's form. Mask did this to torment Calisto, something he's done multiple times throughout her past, both by making her beautiful and by making her less than. If you're wondering how do you torment someone by making them beautiful, it's because she's usually scarred, and he's like, no, you don't have a scar, and like, ha ha ha. Although really, I was thinking, I was like, I feel like Callisto's like, yeah, okay, good prank, I'm gonna go be beautiful, I guess. Alex doesn't have a fancy code name like Maggie either. He is one of the babies we saw in Inferno, the original Inferno, not the new one. His mutant power looks like it's similar to Glob Herman's. Honestly, I love Glob, although it sounds a little bit more useful than Glob's. But while Glob is a bizarre mutant who is well loved, Alex is tragically mostly unknown. I bet you didn't know about him before this list. Ergo, he is both weird and not someone I would imagine being on the X-Men. Alex has a goo body, which he can control, which basically makes him like a living, walking, gelatinous cube from Dungeons and Dragons. Except I don't think he disintegrates those he takes inside his form. Instead, he can only suffocate them, or he can simply engulf them to like just move them somewhere else, immobilizing them for a time. This next one, Cell, is a weird one, which I guess fitting on this list where we got a bunch of weirdos. He kind of reminds me of Maggot, honestly, but if Maggot didn't like have his maggots, his body can fuse the cells of his entire form so that they become one singular cell. This allows him to absorb damage without being hurt, basically reinforcing his form. He can also turn into a liquid-like state as well, and he can also emit ooze that is basically like acid, allowing him to burn those he comes into contact with, digesting them in essence from the outside. He was part of a group of Chicago mutant warlocks and appeared in the miniseries by Jeff Johns and Sean Martinborough titled simply Morlocks. If you know me and what I usually like to talk about on this channel, then you know I'm a pretty big Peeper fan. Peeper is Peter Quinn. My first ever experience reading about him was during Messiah Complex, and from that moment on, I became a fan of his. This might seem odd to you if you read Messiah Complex. Now this might seem odd to you considering that in that story, he calls X-Factor to report that he's basically being followed, and he's soon after attacked attacked and killed by Predator X. When Siren later arrives on the scene, it is implied that it is a very gruesome one. But I just tend to gravitate towards the mutants who feel very much like everyday characters. Also, if you're worried about Peeper, don't be worried because he later on just shows up and he's like totally fine. I don't think we've ever gotten an explanation for that, but somehow he's fine. I know it seems like he died horribly, but he apparently didn't. He just shows up later and it's never explained, in case you were wondering. So he's good. But I just tend to gravitate towards the mutants who feel like very everyday characters, I guess. They might not be the ones in the main books, but for some reason, that's what I like about them. Maybe it's because it makes them feel more grounded in reality or relatable. After all, none of us on this planet are superheroes, and while some people might have abilities that make them seem that way, or might be heroes of a kind, superhero is not something that usually intersects. Characters like Peeper make me feel more seen in a comic. Like Peeper, I too had my own villain era, but am always striving now to be more of a hero in my own way every day. Peeper's powers aren't anything crazy. He has basically superhuman vision, which allows him to see further away, and which also allows him to see like closer up than normal human eyes can see. And while I feel some folks may have forgotten this one in recent years, he can also fire optic blasts. And mostly his eyes just kind of bulge out of his head. His optic blasts, though, I think are lesser strength and like lesser skill set than Cyclops. I feel bad for this next one. We're talking about Amber. She got one pretty cool story where she is clearly established as a college kid who just wants to live her life, and despite being immune, doesn't really let this define who she is or what she's capable of. And then, right after, we think, wow, that's cool. Amber could be a really cool character to follow along, just even in a slice of life story, or especially if she was pulled into becoming a mutant hero. But no, she gets depowered during M-Day. Or at least that's what I believed happened. I'm not sure if it was ever specified. A lot of people were depowered during M-Day, and she's one of the people that we believe was depowered. I don't think she's ever specifically seen after her adventure with Jono during her appearance in his Chamber series. It was a mini-series, only a few issues. Amber was definitely weird to behold because her default physical mutation made her green and covered in spikes. But she was actually a shapeshifter who typically shapeshifted into a beautiful woman in her dreams. But she also could control this ability and just shapeshift, I think, pretty normally. I think she just mainly preferred to like just appear as she was, which honestly, super cool. Kind of like Mystique, but what if Mystique wasn't a baddie and just like wanted to chill and go to college? Which I kind of love as a story. While a student at the Xavier Institute, I don't believe this next mutant, Slick, ever made the main X-Men team, nor has he been featured on any spin-off mutant team either. Slick's powers were charisma-based. He basically exuded charisma and made himself likable. He could also cast illusions, as we later learn when he and Quentin Quire's kid Omega butted heads. The two didn't get along, and of course at one point, Quire used his powers to dispel the illusions that Slick was constantly casting. Now these illusions made him appear as a handsome young man, but this was not actually his true appearance, as it turned out. He also had a physical mutation and appeared as a small, web-footed creature with pointed ears. Kind of impish looking, if you want to imagine that, but I'm sure we're showing you a picture right now. After having his true appearance revealed at the moment when he was working on a song with his girlfriend Tattoo, she broke up with him. Maybe not because of his appearance, maybe more because she was like, you didn't even tell me this. I didn't even know this is what you look like. Slither isn't just a weird character, he's also a bad guy, which is why he would probably never join the X-Men. But if he was a hero, I'd be surprised to see him on the main team. For the most part, I'd say that mutants on the main X-Men roster tend to be pretty normal looking. In fact, many of them are also very pretty looking. I think for the most part, this is because the X-Men are meant to be a premier superhero team, serving not just the mutant community, but also the world at large. We don't usually see people with significant physical mutations on there. I mean, Beast is big and blue, but he's also often likened to like a giant teddy bear. And even with mainstay Beast, he started out looking just like a normal person pretty much, save for his oversized feet and hands before he went through his secondary mutation. Slither also literally looks like a snake, which I'm sure would make having to save people who are afraid of snakes, a pretty common fear amongst many people, a lot more challenging. And finally, Cool Million. 1, Cool Million is a villain. 2, he is the most 90s I've seen in terms of his character design. And 3, his name is Cool Million. So yeah, I don't think he'll ever be making the cut for the X-Men, ever. Cool Million operated as a mercenary in the comics and at one point was hired to work for Hydra. His mutant power was apparently psionic and that of persuasion, but he could only persuade people while like maintaining eye contact with them. However, I don't know, it could have been lasting. Like, I'm like, you do this, and then you go off and do it. But I like to imagine that you have to maintain eye contact the entire time, because that's funnier.
Number 10, Thor from the 90s. Around the time of the Avengers crossover event The Crossing, pretty much all of the Avengers got new costumes, and even though Thor was not directly tied into the actual event, he absolutely did too. All the costumes here were very over the top, and that was definitely the case with Thor. With endless belts, pouches, oversized shoulder pads complete with a giant metal codpiece, plus long chains out of nowhere for his hammer, he looks a lot like many other characters from the 90s, but he doesn't particularly look like Thor outside of Mjolnir. But at the same time, I actually kinda like it. I think if this costume had been worn by a wholly different character, it may have been a bit more acceptable, but I do agree without the hammer you may not recognize this as Thor. The funny thing is, Thor didn't even wear this costume really. Despite being shown in promotional materials as his new look, he didn't actually wear the costume, instead running around shirtless for most of the time that he was supposed to be wearing this new outfit. When he returned after temporarily passing away with the rest of his teammates during Onslaught, he was back in his traditional costume.
Number 9. Spy D. Okay, so this is actually not the name of this look for Miles, nor is it actually a name that we use for this character today, but for a while, Marvel actually considered changing a superhero name from just Spider-Man to Spy D. I'm not joking, guys, this is a real thing. And equally bizarre, I think, is this costume change that we saw Miles get a few years back. After his black and red spider suit was destroyed, one of Miles' friends in the comics, a young sort of up-and-coming clothing designer, decided to make him a replacement suit. I mean, at least it has a reason for existing, and it does actually look really comfy. I personally would wear this, but you know, maybe not to fight crime in.
Number 8. Dark Claw. I do not believe that it is all wrong to call the DC Marvel amalgam character Dark Claw just a little bit bizarre. This character is a beloved mix of DC Comics' Batman, the Dark Knight, and Cape Crusader, mixed with Marvel's resident angry Canadian, Wolverine. It was not only an incredibly smart move by both companies to try this, but it's just an insanely awesome build for a comic book character. It's shocking that it wasn't done before or expanded upon since. Either way, it happened when it happened, and the outfit worn by Logan Wayne is all kinds of ridiculous. It's got far too many large pointy parts, like mixing the cowl of Batman with the cowl of Wolverine to give us a cowl that looks like it would be problematic to wear at best. The belt looks like it would be the absolute worst, and the cape is just a tiny bit humongous, complete with pointy shoulders that I feel would also get in the way of this clawed martial artist's daily operations. But I will absolutely never pretend that this isn't the most awesome thing I have ever seen in a very long time.
Number 7. Power Girl. A lot of people give Power Girl a hard time for having her cut out in her costume. People for years have seen this as an objectification of the character, and while this might have been true, actually initially, Power Girl at least has been given the opportunity to own this part of her costume. At one point, they even give an explanation in the comics for why the cutout exists, other than the initial real-world reason of just really objectifying her, which co-creator Wally Wood even admitted to, saying that he actually drew her bust larger and larger intentionally until DC had to ask him to stop. In JSA Classified issue number 2, Power Girl explains that the window represents, in a way, her lack of identity or motivation she feels she has as a hero. She wanted a symbol like Superman's at that spot in her costume, but wanted to find her own symbol to represent who she was. She didn't want to copy others related to her by giving herself the same S that both Supergirl and Superman wear, but at the same time she struggled to figure out what that symbol should be for herself, what it and what she wanted to represent. And she even talks about how the hole in the costume kind of is like representing a hole inside herself, if that makes sense. Now, while some have made fun of this explanation, saying she could have just covered up and left a blank white spot on her outfit where her chest is, I actually kind of like it for Power Girl, who is a character that has often struggled with living in the shadow of other super family members' identities.
Number 6. Azrael Batsuit. When Azrael took over as Batman in the 1990s following the Nightfall story and Batman having his back cracked in half by the villain Bane, the idea by Batman editor Denny O'Neil was to show just how the real Batman was so much better than some quote extreme hero, which was what people in the 90s seemed to be completely obsessed with. All this to say that Azrael's Batman was intentionally over the top to prove this point. Starting as just another Batman suit, he still upped the ante by giving the gauntlets claws. Very edgy, literally. But as he went on as Batman, he got more and more extreme, and so did his costume. With a blue, black, and gold color scheme, the suit became more armor-like, loaded up with pouches, huge bladed gauntlets, a blue bat helmet with red glowing eyes. The cape gained massive pointed shoulders. Time kept going on, and so did Azrael's grip on reality, until he replaced the blue of his suit with red, added multiple spikes onto his cape's shoulder area, and made his cape appear more wing-like with multiple different different strands of fabric. The only problem with all of this is I think it actually looks really freaking cool. Maybe I'm crazy, but it's just super awesome. When DC brought him back as Batman for Tales from the Dark Multiverse Batman Nightfall story, they made a more subtle change to his look that felt more in line with the character's own history and affiliations, and every single one of the suits he has worn as Batman, to me, not only look really cool, but they also are really good storytelling devices.
Number 5. Vampirella. When it comes to Vampy, there are many people who take issue with her outfit. And while for someone like Red Sonja, who literally is a barbarian running around in a chainmail bikini, I get the complaints regarding the skimpy outfit in terms of practicality, I think for someone like Vampirella, her look actually does make sense, and even actually works to her benefit. Vampy is a vampire who, depending on the origin you prefer, either came from a planet of space vampires or came from basically hell, being the daughter of the biblical Lilith. Vampires thematically tend to be used to explore the themes of promiscuity, repression of physical desires, and empowerment in regards to one's body, the use, control, and manipulation of it. So as a vampire alone, I actually think this outfit really works. But then you also consider that this costume was designed in the late 60s by a woman who was also part of the underground comics movement, Trina Robbins. Robbins throughout her career has been involved in feminist writings and art, and has also promoted the idea of women reading comics and getting involved in the comic book industry. As such, I've always seen Vampy's initial costume as one that represents women owning and loving their bodies and the deadly allure of the vampire.
Number 4. War Machine: The Crossing. War Machine is plagued by an issue that not a lot of other comic book characters have to deal with, that being that his character was a spin-off of a much more popular hero, Iron Man. War Machine's armor was a more obviously combat-inclined Tony Stark designed version of Iron Man's armor, and during the 90s and his solo series, Marvel wanted to distance the character from Iron Man. Stark just happened to be the villain of the Avengers: The Crossing event that we just talked about with Thor, and because of that, Rhodey could not get another suit of armor from him after losing his original armor. So instead, he was chosen by a race of warrior aliens known as the Eidolon, I think is how you pronounce it, to wear a special armor called Warwear, and funnily enough, it was because of his connection to Stark. This armor was intentionally designed to look very alien, and it succeeded in that. It was really weird looking, like just look at it. And yet, here I am to say, while it was super strange, it is also kind of really cool, and it definitely pushes the character's look way off from Tony Stark and his armors. The colors, the build of it, its capabilities, the fact that it looks almost organic, how the helmet only covered half of his head, it's all so different from Stark and is incredibly unique in general. Fortunately, or fortunately depending on your preference, Rhodey gave up the Warwear by sacrificing it to erase all information about the Iron Man technology from Stark Enterprises servers.
Number 3. Black Bolt. Oh my goodness, I love Black Bolt, but I cannot get over the tuning fork on his head. Overall, I would say his costume is pretty cool and sleek, although it kinda looks like it would be challenging to get into, honestly. Is Black Bolt bald, by the way? I don't think he is. If he's not, he must have to smooth his hair down every morning and then like put a cap on before he pulls the suit on over his head. I'm not sure what exact textile his suit is made out of, but I can't imagine covering your hair in this way every day would be good for it or comfortable. People say wearing hats constantly is actually not good for your hair, so I can imagine a suit with an attached head cap, headpiece, head mask would be even worse. However, when it comes to Black Bolt, his little glider wings and his tuning fork actually do make some sense in terms of his powers and his character. His tuning fork actually helps him to channel his powers, giving him greater control, and his little glider wings attached to his arms would actually make it easier for him to move around when he's flying. Because yeah, Black Bolt can actually use his speech-centered electron manipulation powers to also fly. So yeah.
Number 2. Electric Blue. In 1996, Superman had absorbed a massive amount of energy and attack from an enemy. He survived the ordeal, but strangely enough, the robots at the Fortress of Solitude no longer recognized his DNA as Kryptonian. Superman then also temporarily lost his superpowers as part of a crossover called Final Night, where the Earth's sun was extinguished. Ultimately, the sun was reignited, and when he went to charge up and get his powers back, his powers began changing. He became much faster. His invulnerability now became intangibility, ability. His X-ray vision displayed the electromagnetic spectrum. His super strength became him magnetically lifting things, and he gained the power to emit electricity. The downside was that he ended up becoming supercharged with solar energy to the point where his body could no longer process it in a way it used to, and he basically imploded into a mass of energy. Luckily though, he was saved by wearing an energy containment suit created by Emil Hamilton and Lex Luthor. He was now able to control his vastly different powers, but he required the suit to stay intact. The suit itself is not bad at all. I actually really like the look of this super suit. He looked awesome. The problem is, this is Superman. Changing him in such an absolutely drastic manner did not go over well with fans, and eventually those powers went away and he went back to the status quo as all comic characters do. But he still looked pretty cool. Just saying.
Number 1. Peacemaker. Probably the weirdest and wildest costume out there is Peacemaker's. The live-action Peacemaker series doesn't even hesitate to make fun of the look as early as the first episode. But while Peacemaker's costume may seem ridiculous, and don't get me wrong, I know it is, there's no argument there, it is also extremely iconic and memorable. The white pants, the weird toilet seat shaped helmet. In the comics, Chris's helmet is also more than just a stylish accessory. It is also a device that he uses to talk to, well, ghosts. The ghosts of those that he's killed and the ghost of his father. However, it's also been implied that this is less the helmet's doing and more Chris's mind and PTSD that are making him think he's talking to ghosts. Still, I feel like for who Peacemaker is, this suit, while silly, actually works really well for the character, and I'm also really glad that they pretty much adapted it one for live action. It's great.
Coming in at number 10, Ultimate Marvel. This version of Doctor Strange begins in the Ultimate Marvel universe, where we first see him in flashbacks where he married a former student of his, Clea. After the two of them had a child, also known as Stephen Jr., kinda tacky, I know, Strange Sr. soon vanished, resulting in his wife deciding to raise little Stephen Jr. away from magic. However, once Stephen Jr. is attending college, he's approached by Wong, who tells him stories of his father and agrees to take him on as a student. Now Strange takes an interesting role here where he becomes a type of guru, if you will, kind of like Tony Robbins meets Dr. Oz meets small knowledge of magic. He is then known to the masses as Doctor Strange, even though he doesn't really have a medical degree, kind of like some other doctors we know. Bill Cosby. What? Number 9, Earth X. In this version of Doctor Strange, we begin in Earth X universe, where he's murdered by Clea, who is this Earth Sorceress Supreme, under the command of Loki though. He then takes a celestial form and assists Captain Marvel as he journeys through Death's realm. Strange spent the next 3 years providing wisdom to Mar-Vell, who is basically building an army of superhumans, and when Mar-Vell was successful, he used his powers to bring Doctor Strange back to life. Upon returning, he worked together with Clea to stop the resurrection of Fin Fang Foom. I know it's a mouthful, but there it is. After all of that, Strange pleaded with Clea that he would devote his life to her, but she sadly turned him down, believing that their relationship was over. I mean, she did kill him. What did he expect? Still, sad Strange is sad. Number 8, Exiles. Another Strange version of Strange is one where he helps the Exiles, who were originally a team of X-Men consisting of Blink, Mimic, Magnus, Lensure, Thunderbird, Nocturne, and Morph. In this version of Doctor Strange, he had no mystical powers, and instead still practiced as a physician, specializing in superhumans. Lastly, in this version of Doctor Strange, he's killed by an alternate version of Deadpool. Rest in peace, Doctor Strange. Number 7, Age of X. In the Age of X universe, Doctor Strange works as a double agent for Magneto, posing as a mutant hunter for hire. In this reality though, he uses his abilities to safely teleport the mutants he finds to Fortress X, where they can find safety. What a nice guy. Number 6, Duck World. In this timeline, we have an anthropomorphic duck version of Doctor Strange, better known in this world as Doctor Strange. Man, I love a good pun. And he is adorable. In the home world and dimension of Howard the Duck, Doctor Strange practices the mallard of the mystic arts. However, as you can see in the photo, he's a bit of a lost drunk who lives in alleyways drinking what he calls sorceress sauce, aka alcohol. He's sought after though for his powers in the mystic arts and is utilized by Stu the Intern in She-Hulk Volume 4 number 20, where he helps Stu return to Earth. And Doctor Strange, such a good pun, man. I can't get over that. What can I say? I'm impressed easily. Number 5, 2099. now we take you to 2099, where Doctor Strange is a young woman, also known as the Sorceress Supreme. She refers to herself as, well, Strange. Secretly, she is intertwined with a gruesome demon, and in this timeline, Strange's mystical powers are not honed, and therefore she makes some reckless decisions. In one event, she displays her inexperienced abilities by killing her brother and her main foe Garrick, who believed that he could get the upper hand due to the lack of her experience and take the title of Sorcerer Supreme. There is another version of 2099 where we see a sort of reset, if you will, where Maestro has gained control over a demolished world and keeps Strange confined within a mystical circle. Number 4. Mutant X. In the Mutant X universe, the title of Sorcerer Supreme belonged to Mordo, and Doctor Strange reveals an immensely different counterpart that we've ever seen. After saving his friend Dr. Ted Sallis of a curse, if you will, known as the Man-Thing, Doctor Strange then takes on the curse himself, thus resulting in him becoming the Man-Thing. And once the curse took him over, he became the guardian of the nexus of all realities. Strange wasn't able to leave his post until Havoc and the Defenders destroyed the nexus to stop the Goblin Queen from tapping into its power. Number 3. Marvel Zombies. That's right, zombie fans, we have a zombie version of Doctor Strange, and in this universe, he's known as one of the very last heroes to take on the zombie form. After a tough battle as part of Nick Fury's resistance against the zombie Marvel characters in the spin-off of Dead Days Before, he's turned by the zombie Fantastic Four. He is then used multiple times, once in a multi-zombie attack on Doctor Doom's castle, where he hoped to turn more unaffected citizens, and again in Marvel Zombies 3, where he joins the Kingpin's alliance. Now, Kingpin uses Zombie Strange's remaining 2 spells to allow himself to see into other universes. Unfortunately for zombie Doctor Strange, he's killed by Ultron. Number 2. Bullet Points. This timeline is a mini-series where Doctor Strange decided to lend a helping hand to S.H.I.E.L.D. after they, well, restored his hands. This version is pretty cool because later on we get to see him with these cool Wolverine-esque claws. Number 1. 1602. Last but not least, we have the Marvel 1602 universe. In this timeline, Doctor Strange is better known as Sir Stephen Strange, and he acts as both a court physician of Queen Elizabeth I and a magician. As far as history is concerned, Sir Stephen Strange is the equivalent to John Dee, who was an English mathematician, astronomer, and an advisor to Queen Elizabeth I. Now, given the time period, it makes perfect sense that Strange cannot fully access his astral projection, also known as a magic mirror, in which he has these outer body experiences. Now, the technology at the time just sets him back and quite often leaves him physically drained when finished. That doesn't stop him though. He keeps trying, and one time he makes contact with Uatu, also known as the Watcher. In this contact, Sir Strange is warned of the danger caused by the Forerunner's arrival, and although this information is basically useless because he's compelled not to speak or act on any of this new knowledge. When Queen Elizabeth dies, he turns himself in to be executed for crimes of witchcraft and treason, and after his head is removed, Clea keeps it alive for a small window of time to share the information given by the Watcher to other superheroes, kind of in hopes to stop the destruction of their reality.
Dead Girl was a mutant with light blue skin, spooky powers, and dreams of fame. Though she appeared regularly throughout the end of X-Force's original run and its continuation, X-Statix, she was constantly overshadowed by her teammates. I can't think of a better way to prepare for Halloween than by chatting about this girly. Dead Girl first appeared in X-Force 125 in 2002. X-Force members Orphan, You-Go Girl, and Anarchist went to a graveyard to officially recruit Dead Girl into their ranks. Like a good undead character, she arrived at her first mission wearing tattered clothes and a rope for a belt, so undead casual. However, it was suggested that she was purposely trying to scare her teammates. Though she recounted her past for the team, Dead Girl did not tell them her real name. When Dead Girl was alive, she was an aspiring actor but fell in love with a man who eventually took her life. Her mutant powers manifested when, after the passing, she regained consciousness in a cemetery and realized that she could communicate with her dead cohabitants. The spirits lured the life taker back to the cemetery for her, so Dead Girl pulled him into her grave and made a mattress out of his bones, which is so iconic. While an excellent tale of revenge, much of Dead Girl's origin was still shrouded in mystery, though she was accepted into into X-Force, not even Dead Girl knew the full extent of her powers. She found out quickly, however, that when her body was blown to bits, she could slowly and grossly reform. Dead Girl could also control her dismembered limbs as she choked an enemy with a detached arm. This mutant was creepy and gross and awesome. It was as if she came directly from a horror movie into a comic book. The New Mutants had one of the wackiest adventures in superhero history, even by X-Men standards, and the core of those stories from the beginning was Danielle Moonstar. Known as the mutant Mirage, Dani's powers started out simple enough, if a little mystical and ill-defined, but over the course of her history they would develop, change completely, be lost altogether, and join new powers that had nothing to do with her being a mutant. Starting out as an orphaned girl living on a reservation with her grandfather, Dani experienced precognitive visions of the future and a psychic connection to the animals around her, but her primary power proved to be the ability to craft illusions embodying the fears of those around her that seemed terrifyingly real. While her psychic connection with animals came in handy alongside her teammate Wolfsbane, who could assume a lupine form, Dani took the name Mirage and honed her ability to craft illusions as her primary weapon. Doreen Green, aka Squirrel Girl, is not a typical superhero. She has a unique ability to communicate with squirrels and possesses the agility and strength of her rodent friends. Her seemingly bizarre powers have made her the subject of many jokes, but don't underestimate her. Squirrel Girl has repeatedly proven she's a force to be reckoned with. She has defeated some of the Marvel Universe's most powerful villains, including Thanos. Her unconventional tactics and problem-solving skills have earned her a dedicated fanbase and a reputation as one of Marvel's most enduring and compelling heroes. The world's smartest person with a huge red dinosaur for an ally couldn't be better. Young superhero Lunella Lafayette, aka Moon Girl. With her array of gadgets, her bizarre inhuman ability, and her vast intelligence, Moon Girl has the brains to outsmart just about anyone. Primarily aided by her genius-level intelligence when fighting bad guys, Lunella is the smartest person in the world despite her youth. The 10-story tall beast called Devil Dinosaur assists Lunella in battle. Devil Dinosaur possesses human-level intelligence, sharp claws, and a vicious bite, making him a formidable ally. Moon Girl's inhuman ability allows her to swap minds with Devil Dinosaur, but it's not entirely within her control. Several things can trigger the mind swap, such as stress, anger, or hunger. Additionally, they will spontaneously switch brains during the full moon lunar phase. Lunella carries a variety of tools and gadgets invented by herself to aid her heroic pursuits. These devices include a spring-loaded boxing glove and a taser, all bizarre but certainly functional. Every Marvel fan knows the Avengers, but aside from that main team though, there are several other superhero teams that use the word Avengers, and not all of them are so great. The Great Lakes Avengers especially are a team focused primarily on outsiders and D-list heroes. Big Bertha is one of the most controversial members of this team. In her civilian life, she's a model, Ashley Crawford, but when she wants to, or has to, she can transform into a very obese woman, which didn't sit well with some readers, especially because other characters often make fun of Big Bertha because of her appearance. The good news here is that Big Bertha is incredibly strong and can easily squish a lot of her opponents, and since she looks different in her civilian life, her superhero identity is a well-protected secret, unlike other superheroes who out themselves to the public and then severely regret it later, such as Spider-Man during the Civil War storyline. Still, there are a lot of Marvel heroes who are super strong without the need to transform in such a way, which makes Ashley's power one of the strangest ones. Spring-heeled Jack, also known as just Jack, possesses the extraordinary ability to leap great distances thanks to his incredibly powerful legs. While this power may appear unremarkable compared to some other superheroes, Jack has used his leaping abilities to significantly take down some of the most formidable villains in the entire DC universe. Despite being a lesser-known hero, Jack's acrobatic skills and unparalleled agility have proven valuable assets in combat, allowing him to evade attacks and strike from unexpected angles. With his unique power and impressive combat skills, Spring-heeled Jack is a hero not to be underestimated. Dog Welder, aka also a Jack, is one of the most bizarre superheroes with a disturbing and intriguing ability. As the name suggests, his power involves welding dead dogs to people's faces, which is not for the faint of heart. Despite the grotesque nature of his power, Dog Welder has used it effectively to take down criminals and other villains, making him a valuable asset to his team. While his methods may seem extreme, his dedication to justice cannot be denied, and he is a reminder that even the weirdest powers can be used for good. Johnny D has my least favorite mutation that I've ever seen, and also the strangest mutation I've ever seen. A sentient maw attached to him. It's right in the middle of his chest, and Johnny has named it the Freak. The Freak produces voodoo dolls. To get a doll, Johnny must feed the maw a DNA sample, like hair. The maw will spit out the doll, and Johnny will get full, absolute control over that person. Now, I'm sure that getting people's DNA is probably really annoying, but once you have it and you have the doll, there is nothing Johnny can't do. As it stands, there isn't anyone that he can't control if he has their doll. There is a theory that Johnny is not the mutant, but that the maw is the mutant, and that it's just attached to a normal Johnny. The Freak does have its own brain, so it's a very real possibility, but they're literally attached, so Johnny, mutant or not, you might as well be. Johnny happened to be one of the only mutants to keep his mutation after M-Day, and can I just say, I would be so mad. Imagine learning that hundreds of mutants lost their powers, but you were still stuck with your chest maw, a chest maw that once tried to hurt you. That would be the start of my villain arc. Personally, Johnny is stronger than me. Jack Hawksmoor can either be the most powerful hero on the battlefield or the weakest, and it depends entirely on one odd factor: the size of the city he's in. Hawksmoor of the Wildstorm universe experiences a symbiotic link with whatever city he's in. The bigger the city, the more powerful he is. In fact, if Jack were to exist outside a large urban center for long, he would literally pass away, so it's imperative that he lives somewhere like New York. The reason Hawksmoor is like this is because time-traveling scientists used him as a lab rat, and he is now more alien organs and foreign objects than human. Jack's city-sanctioned powers are the stuff that you would usually see, like enhanced senses, the ability to stick to walls and also phase himself and others through walls, sometimes fatally to his enemy. Then he also has traditional superpowers with like a city spin on them, like he's capable of telepathy, but with buildings. He can also go up to a window or a mirror and see everything it has seen, almost like it's a personal security camera. He also uses windows and mirrors as a form of teleportation, stepping into one and out another. One time in Jenny Sparks' The Secret History of the Authority, Jack literally turned the entire city of Tokyo into a giant battle suit to fight Kansas City, which also gained sentience for some reason. A final fun bit about Jack's powers is whatever city he's in, he speaks every language spoken in that city, and that is pretty powerful in itself.
Kicking things off today, we're looking at an alternate Earth that is probably one of the most obvious ways to change things up. Earth 8311, also known as Larval Earth, is home to anthropomorphic animal superheroes. There are no humans here. Instead, this universe has what is called an anthropomorphic field that has an effect on animals, changing them into humanoid versions of themselves with the ability to speak. This happened to one of the inhuman Lockjaw's siblings. Her name was Doc Jaw. She was taken in by Mr. Fantastic, and yes, that's Mr. Fantastic, as a moose, and he trained her to become a pretty accomplished scientist. But she is far from the only animal to make a name for themselves here. Arguably, the most well-known of Larval Earth's denizens would be Peter Porker, aka Spider-Ham. But others include Daredevil, Nick Fury, the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and the one that caught me off guard the most, Black Panda. On the villainous side of things, we have Magsquito, Sand Manatee, and Kangaroo the Conqueror, which is just fantastic. Now, following the events of the superhuman civil war, people were a little bummed out. Understandably so. That little conflict didn't end in laughs, shaking hands, and happy smiles. It ended in tears, broken friendships, and fallen allies. So, naturally, Reed Richards can't just accept reality for what it is, and he goes searching for alternate Earths where things didn't go so badly in Dark Reign Fantastic Four #2 from April of 2009. But of course, things go south. A power outage causes Reed's machine to go a little off the chain. In an alternate timeline created by the machine, Susan Storm, the Invisible Woman, rules a medieval world taking the name Queen Storm. Her throne is flanked by her brother Johnny in full plate armor, and the Thing dressed like an aristocrat. She seems to be leading one side of a medieval superhuman civil war. We see Captain America, Iron Fist, Cable, Daredevil, and Luke Cage Power Man as they prepare for a battle with a man with an iron heart who is just outside the castle preparing to attack with his group. Now, before the conflict begins, we get to hear Chamberlain Grimm say his classic line, "Milady, 'tis the clobbering hour," and it's fantastic. But before we can see more, we move to other alternate timelines. In Uncanny X-Men number 153, Kitty Pryde has to tell Colossus's little sister Illyana a bedtime story. So what does she do? She comes up up with an adorable little story recasting her friends as pirates, wizards, genies, and for one of my faves, Nightcrawler, Kitty turns him into little tiny nightcrawlers that look eerily like Smurfs that she calls Bamfs. At first, there's just one, and it pops up and immediately falls in love with Kitty before like 10 of the little guys start popping up. But this is a comic book. Why tell a bedtime story when that bedtime story could easily just become a completely different universe that actually exists? Thanks to a mishap in the X-Men's Danger Room, Nightcrawler is transported to another dimension where the characters from Kitty's story, including all the Bamfs, really exist. And that place is Earth 5311. 1979's What If number 14 gives us a very different approach to history. Instead of World War II being fought in Europe, it is instead fought in space. In this alternate timeline, we discovered interstellar travel much earlier in our history, and as such, the World War II we fight is more like space sector war between Sector Alpha and Sector Beta in space, and I do not know where that is. As this is still set at the same general time as the regular World War II, some of the same characters are going to be involved, including the original Nick Fury and his Howling Commandos. This story has new high-tech weaponry, fishbowl helmets, and aliens, and it's just a good bit of fun. Now we learn in the story that Admiral von Strucker is actually working with the alien Axis powers to create a master race, so it seems that even in this alternate world where we can master interstellar travel, we can't really just figure out racism. Now in the alternate reality of AD 3167, which appeared in Extraordinary X-Men number 11 from June 2016, Apocalypse showed up in the 21st century bringing with him the Great Trials. Now this event saw the end of entire civilizations and races on Earth and left only the Atlanteans, the Inhumans, an AI race known as the Stark Self, the Wakandans, the Mystics, and the Maloids. And they all lived under Apocalypse's rule on Omega World. This was a huge structure composed of bubble worlds that preserved what little remained of Earth after Apocalypse's ascension. The part that will blow your mind is that Omega World itself, the entire structure, is Apocalypse. He still had a human form, and that essentially functioned as the Omega World's heart, keeping the whole place functional. At the same time, his horsemen functioned as like Omega World's antibodies, being sent out to cleanse the structure of anything that could harm their master. The mutant Colossus and a bunch of young mutants were transported here, where Colossus was captured and became another of Apocalypse's horsemen. Apocalypse was now after an ark being held by the mutant kids that contained thousands of mutant embryos. He should have left it all alone though, because it got him a good old sword in the back by the end of the story. That doesn't matter though, because the world is cool. Taking place on Earth 97161, Simon Walterson was a pretty killer football player whose career came crashing down due to a knee injury. Simon found the love of his life, married her, had a kid, and then they both passed away. But wait, it gets even worse. Simon got himself cursed by a witch after he wasn't able to pay her for connecting him with his wife and child in the afterlife. Now this curse turned Simon from a strapping man into a frog. Simon luckily found himself being accepted into a frog clan that lived in Central Park, and Simon took on the frog name of Puddlegup. Now, Puddlegup managed to assist the god of thunder Thor in a war between rats and frogs. After the fight, a piece of Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, was broken off, and Puddlegup was able to lift the sliver of hammer, which then transformed into a miniature version of Thor's hammer, and it turned Puddlegup into the mighty Throg, a frog with the powers of Thor. This world is the home of the Pet Avengers, a group of animals who belong to or are related in some way to various superheroes and who manage to form together as a team. Fantastic. Neil Gaiman's Marvel 1602 is one of my favorite comic book stories, but I will admit it can be a little weird. Basically, to lay it out, the universe the story takes place in, Earth 311, actually got its start in a different alternate reality. On Earth 460, Purple Man had used his powers of persuasion to become president for life. In that world, most heroes had been hunted down or had died from old age, but Captain America was one holdout. Unfortunately, he is captured and banished away to Earth 616's 1599. But because he showed up in the world, it inadvertently, and for some reason, created an entirely different alternate timeline known as Earth 311. For some reason, the presence of Captain Captain America destabilized reality and began the emergence of heroes and villains into this world who are counterparts to many of the present day heroes and villains of the Marvel Universe that we are used to. Characters like Count Otto von Doom the Handsome, Witchbreed, who are actually mutants, Thor from the Fantastic, Sir Nicholas Fury, David Banner, all these guys. These are some of the alternate versions of these characters. The story is so interesting, intertwining actual history with superpowered beings, but it's not without its confusing moments, and most of that has to do with how this story's world even came to be in the first place. While originally a crossover advertisement deal between Marvel Comics and Hostess, you know, the company that owns Twinkies, Snowballs, and those cupcake snack pastries, the Spider-Man of Earth 51914 is an official member of the Spider-Verse, being defeated by Morlun in the first Spider-Verse comic in 2014. But Morlun has defeated many spider totems, it's his whole thing. This Spider-Man is still more powerful than you may think. This sweet Spider-Man has all the same powers as our 616 spider-based hero, only has the added benefit of using Hostess snacks as equipment, whether it be to distract, lure, or even reason with criminals, and it even got him out of tight spots in his relationships. Like when he gave Mary Jane a cupcake so that he could slip away to fight crime. The power of sweet pastries should not be undervalued. Now, using his pastry-based equipment, he was able to defeat the Fly, Printout Man, Simon the Evil Swami, Madam Web, Legal Eagle, and an unnamed jewel thief. So yeah, it's not just a sponsor, it's an actual added ability that puts him a cut above. Unfortunately, this all happened before Morlun showed up and sucked out Hosty Spidey's life force, which was apparently quite sweet. Marvel Max was a 2001 imprint for Marvel that focused on more mature adult stories. As a result, the books were pretty over the top, and that was really their selling factor. But some were just incredibly weird, like the Eternal Max. Essentially, the Eternal Max follows the Eternals, but other than being the immortal servants of the Celestials, these guys are quite different. Taking place just before the dawn of mankind, the Eternals had been serving the Celestials for thousands of years, traveling from planet to mine resources. When the Eternals arrive on a planet, they genetically modify some of the local intelligent life into artificial Eternals, which they call deviants, and they use them as manual labor to make the job easier. When they arrive on Earth though, they do the same thing, turning the proto-humans into deviants. But these deviants are shockingly similar to the Eternals, who are also shockingly similar to us. Now, in the past, the Celestials wiped out every single one of the female Eternals in order to force the male Eternals into servitude. So when these new deviants are created, the male Eternals get all googly-eyed for the female deviants. A large number of the Eternals go against the rules and teach the deviants how to communicate, and they begin to procreate with them. This leads to essentially a mini civil war among the Eternals between their leader Icodin and the second in command, Crassus. It all leads into the Eternals and these deviants basically becoming the first real humans on Earth. At least, that's kind of how I interpreted it. If you are over the age of 18, definitely give it a read because it is really interesting, but also very mature. And finally, if you have never read Marvel, just prepare yourself. This comic kind of just goes and doesn't really stop. The entire thing is satire, but like, not good satire like at all. There's even a page in each issue dedicated to explaining the jokes, and the story itself barely has any kind of actual plot. It's just, well, it was all part of a bet. In 2002, Bill Jemas was vice president at Marvel Comics. He got into an argument with Peter David, and the two of them made a bet. Each would write a comic book starting from issue number 1 to see whose comic could sell more copies. Peter started Captain Marvel, and Bill started Marvel. Marvel features a Superman parody named Kal-AOL, who is the son of Ted Turner and Jane Fonda. It features a farting dog, a racist Iron Man, a farting Rush Limbaugh, scantily clad women for no reason, time travel for no reason, a person who may or may not be God, duckbill dinosaurs that talk, rants about how evolution is fake, and then, what is probably the highlight of the comic, they grab a Jurassic otter, and as they move closer to the modern day, that otter not only evolves to become Wolverine, but that otter Wolverine is also the father of the entire human race. And that is all I got. Thank you so much for watching and making it to the end of the video today on Top 10 Nerd. My name is Adam Andrews. I will catch you all on the flippy flop, and even if I don't, stay safe and peace out.